The phone rang exactly 3 times before I answered it. My hands were steady as I lifted the receiver, the same hands that had signed deployment orders and carried wounded soldiers to safety. But something about that call would shatter every foundation I'd built my life upon. "Major Sarah Chen," I said, voice crisp and professional, the way I'd been trained to answer for the past 15 years. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, measured, careful. "Major Chen, this is Attorney Mitchell from Hancock and Associates. I represent General William Hayes. He's requested to see you before he passes." I froze. The fluorescent lights above my desk hummed their usual tune. Outside my office window, cadets marched across the parade ground, their voices echoing in perfect synchronization. Everything remained exactly as it had been 30 seconds earlier, yet somehow the entire world had tilted sideways. "I think you have the wrong number," I said slowly. "I don't know any General Hayes." There was a pause, then, quieter now, "He said you'd say that." Those words hit me like shrapnel. Sharp, unexpected, finding their mark in places I didn't know were vulnerable. I set the pen down that I'd been holding, watched my fingers tremble slightly against the polished surface of my desk. "Sir, I need you to understand something," I began, falling back on military precision when nothing else made sense. "I've been an orphan since I was 6 years old. Both my parents died in a house fire in Portland. There's no general in my family tree, no mystery relatives waiting in the wings." "Major Chen," the attorney's voice carried a weight I couldn't identify. "General Hayes is dying, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He has perhaps 2 weeks left, and he spent the last month trying to find the courage to make this call." I stood up without realizing it, pacing the small confines of my office. The walls were lined with commendations, photos from deployments, certificates of achievement. A life built from nothing, earned through sweat and determination. No handouts, no family connections, no silver spoons. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves aren't the complete truth. Sometimes they're just the version that allowed us to survive." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the familiar weight of my uniform, the press of my boots against the floor. Everything solid, everything real, everything I'd earned through my own merit. "If this is some kind of scam," I started. "It's not," he interrupted gently. "Major, do you remember anything from before the fire? Anything at all?" The question stopped me cold, because the truth was I didn't. The social workers had explained it as trauma, the mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable memories. I'd accepted that explanation, built my identity around it. The girl who survived tragedy, who pulled herself up from nothing, who made something of herself through pure determination. "I remember waking up in the hospital," I said quietly. "I remember a social worker with kind eyes telling me I was safe now. I remember the foster homes after that." "Nothing before?" "Fragments, pieces, nothing that makes sense." Attorney Mitchell's voice softened even further. "General Hayes has been following your military career for years. Every promotion, every deployment, every commendation. He has newspaper clippings, official reports, photographs from ceremonies you probably forgot about." My legs felt unsteady. I sank back into my chair, gripping the armrests until my knuckles went white. "That's impossible. I would have noticed someone following my career that closely. Not if he was careful, not if he had the resources and connections to stay in the shadows." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Why would a general follow some random orphan's military career?" "Because you're not random, Major, and you're not just some orphan." I closed my eyes, trying to process information that felt too large for my mind to hold. In the distance, I could hear the sound of helicopters conducting training exercises. Normal sounds, routine operations, the steady rhythm of military life continuing around me while my world cracked apart. "I need proof," I said finally. "I can't just take your word for this." The general anticipated that. He asked me to tell you about the locket. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The locket. The small silver pendant I'd worn every day since waking up in that hospital bed 24 years ago. The only physical connection to a past I couldn't remember. It was tucked beneath my uniform shirt right now, warm against my skin. How do you know about the locket? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Because he gave it to you on your 6th birthday, 3 days before the fire that was supposed to kill you both. The room spun. I gripped the edge of my desk, fighting against a wave of dizziness that threatened to pull me under. Supposed to kill us both? The fire wasn't an accident, Major. It was an assassination attempt. Someone wanted General Hayes and his family dead. The official report listed you among the casualties because that was the only way to keep you safe. That's insane, I breathed. People don't just fake the deaths of children. They do when those children are the daughters of men who know too many state secrets. They do when the alternative is watching that child become a target for the rest of her life. I thought about the locket, about the inscription on the back that I'd never been able to read clearly. The letters were worn smooth, but I'd always imagined they spelled out words of love from parents I'd never know. Now those faded markings felt like evidence of a life stolen, a truth buried beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. "Where is he?" I asked, the words escaping before my rational mind could intervene. "Virginia, about 3 hours from your current station. Major, I need you to understand something before you make any decisions. This isn't just about reuniting with family. The people who tried to kill you both are still out there. Coming forward means exposing yourself to risks that have been dormant for over 2 decades. Are you trying to talk me out of coming? I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're walking into. The general has lived with this secret for 24 years. It's eaten at him, consumed him, driven him to watch you from a distance because he was too afraid to get close. He's dying now, and his greatest fear isn't death. It's dying without telling you the truth." I stood again, this time with purpose. My hands moved automatically to my jacket, checking that everything was in place. The gesture was pure habit, something I did before every important mission. "What's his condition exactly?" "Weak, very weak. The doctors gave him 2 weeks, but that was 10 days ago. He's been fighting to stay alive long enough to see you, to explain everything before it's too late. I'll need to request emergency leave. The general has already made arrangements. Your commanding officer received a call an hour ago. You're cleared for immediate departure if you choose to come." The efficiency of it should have impressed me. Instead, it felt like proof that powerful forces had been moving around me my entire life, shaping my path from a distance I'd never imagined. How many other moments had been influenced by a father I didn't know existed? "One more question," I said. "What's my real name?" The pause that followed felt eternal. When Attorney Mitchell spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 24 years of buried truth. "Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, daughter of General William Hayes and Colonel Margaret Hayes, born at Walter Reed Medical Center, baptized at the base chapel, loved beyond measure by parents who thought they'd lost you forever." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the desk. I stared at the wall in front of me, at a certificate bearing the name Sarah Chen, at achievements earned by a woman who apparently never existed. My breathing came in short, sharp bursts as everything I thought I knew about myself dissolved into questions. I picked up the phone with shaking fingers. Attorney Mitchell was still there, waiting patiently for me to process the impossible. "I'll be there tonight," I said. "Thank you, Major. He's been waiting so long to see you again." After I hung up, I sat in absolute silence for nearly an hour. The sun moved across the sky outside my window, casting different shadows across my office, but I remained motionless. Finally, I reached beneath my uniform shirt and pulled out the locket, holding it up to the light. For the first time in 24 years, I could make out the faded inscription on the back. SH from Dad, always safe. My hands trembled as I traced the letters with my fingertip. Sarah Hayes. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. But somewhere deep inside, in a place that remembered things my conscious mind had forgotten, it also felt like coming home. I packed quickly, efficiently, the way I'd learned to do for countless deployments. But this wasn't a mission to some foreign country. This was a journey back to a life I'd never known I'd lost. As I drove through the Virginia countryside that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not in a threatening way, but with the careful attention of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads until I found myself pulling through iron gates that opened automatically as my car approached. The driveway stretched for nearly a mile, lined with oak trees that must have been standing for decades. At the end of that driveway waited answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. Ready to hear. The house materialized through the darkness like something from a half-remembered dream. 3 stories of weathered brick and white columns, windows glowing amber against the Virginia night. My headlights swept across a circular drive where a fountain stood silent, its carved eagles frozen mid-flight. I sat in my car for several minutes after cutting the engine, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The weight of the Locket pressed against my chest, warm from my body heat. Everything about this moment felt suspended, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Attorney Mitchell emerged from the front door before I could gather the courage to knock. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 45, with graying hair and tired eyes that spoke of too many late nights handling impossible situations. "Major Hayes," he said, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, Major Chen, old habits." "I don't know which name feels right anymore," I admitted, stepping out into the cool evening air. He nodded with the understanding of someone who had seen lives turned upside down by legal documents and hidden truths. "That's normal. Identity isn't just what we're called. It's what we choose to become." The front hall was lined with portraits. Military officers spanning decades, their faces serious beneath peaked caps and polished brass. I found myself searching each painting for familiar features, for some echo of my own reflection staring back from gilded frames. "He's upstairs," Mitchell said quietly. "The nurse is with him. His condition has deteriorated since we spoke this afternoon." We climbed a staircase that creaked with age and weight. Family photographs lined the walls, but my eyes kept returning to empty spaces where pictures had obviously been removed. Rectangular patches of unfaded wallpaper marked where memories had once hung. "He took down all the photos of you and your mother after the fire," Mitchell explained, noticing my gaze. "Said it hurt too much to see what he'd lost. But he kept them all, every single one." The hallway stretched longer than it should have, each step echoing like a countdown. Medical equipment hummed behind a partially open door. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask something else underneath. The scent of approaching endings. Mitchell knocked gently before pushing the door open. "General, she's here." The man in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the commanding officers in the portraits downstairs. Age and illness had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes remained sharp, alert, intensely focused. When our gazes met, something passed between us that transcended words. "Sarah." His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried 24 years of accumulated grief. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move forward or retreat. This stranger knew my face better than I knew his, had watched me grow up from a distance while I believed myself completely alone in the world. "I know this is overwhelming," he continued, struggling to sit up straighter. "I know you have every right to hate me for what I've done." "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself with the truth. "I don't know you well enough to hate you." A sad smile crossed his weathered features. "You always were direct. Even as a child, you never said anything you didn't mean." The nurse, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, checked his monitors before quietly excusing herself. Mitchell followed her out, leaving us alone with 2 decades of silence to bridge. "Tell me about the fire," I said, taking a tentative step closer to the bed. His breathing grew labored, not from exertion, but from the weight of memories he'd carried alone for too long. "It started 3 days after your birthday party. You'd wanted a military-themed celebration, insisted on wearing your little dress blues uniform that your mother had made for you." I touched the locket unconsciously, remembering nothing but feeling an echo of something warm and safe. "The intelligence came through secure channels," he continued. "A terrorist cell had targeted military families, high-ranking officers specifically. The threat was credible, immediate, and personal. So you decided to fake our deaths." "I decided to save your life." His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to making impossible choices. "The fire was supposed to be controlled, just enough damage to make the deaths believable. But something went wrong." The machines around his bed beeped steadily, marking time like a metronome counting down his remaining moments. I found myself drawn closer despite every instinct telling me to run. "Your mother was supposed to escape with you through the back of the house. She was supposed to meet me at the safe house we'd prepared, but the fire spread faster than anyone anticipated. She didn't make it out. She made." "Sure you did. The firefighters found her collapsed in the hallway outside your bedroom. She'd gotten you to safety, but the smoke overcame her before she could follow." The weight of that sacrifice settled over me like a heavy blanket. My mother, a woman I couldn't remember, had died to ensure I lived. The life I'd built, every achievement, every moment of happiness or sorrow, existed because she'd chosen my survival over her own. "Why didn't you come for me afterward?" The question came out harder than I'd intended, carrying the accumulated hurt of 24 years of feeling unwanted. "Because they were still hunting, because taking you would have painted a target on your back that might never disappear. Because I was a coward who convinced himself that watching from a distance was the same as being a father." Tears ran down his cheeks, the first display of weakness I'd seen from this man who commanded respect even from his deathbed. "I have albums," he whispered. "Photo albums full of newspaper clippings, graduation programs, deployment announcements, every medal ceremony, every promotion, every moment of pride in your career. I was there for all of it, just never close enough for you to see me." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those ceremonies where I'd stood alone, believing no family cared enough to attend, he'd been watching from the crowd. Every achievement I'd earned while feeling like an orphan with no one to make proud had actually been witnessed by a father who was bursting with pride he couldn't express. "I saw you graduate from the academy," he continued. "West Point, class of 2010. You stood so straight during the oath ceremony. I wanted to run down from the bleachers and tell everyone that the brilliant young officer with perfect posture was my daughter." "Why didn't you?" "Because I'd already stolen 6 years of your childhood. I wouldn't risk stealing your future, too." I sank into the chair beside his bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of sacrifice and loss that had shaped both our lives. This man had given up the joy of watching his daughter grow up to ensure she had the chance to grow up at all. "The locket," I said, pulling it out from beneath my uniform. "You gave this to me." His eyes brightened, the first genuine smile I'd seen crossing his face. "Your 6th birthday. You insisted on having the party in my office at the Pentagon. Said you wanted to be surrounded by important military things." For the first time, a fragment of memory surfaced. Not visual, but emotional. The feeling of being small and safe in a big chair, surrounded by the smell of leather and aftershave and something indefinably secure. "You made me feel important," I whispered, the words coming from some deep place I'd forgotten existed. "You were the most important thing in my world. You and your mother both." Outside the window, dawn was beginning to creep across the Virginia sky. The night that had started with a phone call and impossible revelations was giving way to a day where everything would be different. "I don't know how to be your daughter," I admitted. "I've spent my entire adult life believing I was self-made, that everything I achieved came from my own determination. "It did," he said firmly. "The blood that runs through your veins is mine, but the courage, the strength, the honor you've shown throughout your career, that's all you. I may have given you life, but you made that life extraordinary." The monitors around his bed began to beat more rapidly. His breathing grew shallow, labored. I could see the effort it took for him to stay focused on our conversation. "There are things you need to know," he said urgently. "Documents, bank accounts, properties. Mitchell has everything prepared, but most importantly, there are still people out there who might remember the Hayes family. You'll need to be careful." "I've been a soldier for 15 years," I said. "I know how to be careful." "This is different. These aren't foreign enemies or battlefield threats. These are shadows from the past that have been sleeping for decades. Coming forward, reclaiming your identity, it might wake them up." The weight of his warning settled over me. I'd spent my military career facing known dangers, enemies I could identify and engage, but this was different. This was stepping back into a life that powerful people had tried to erase, accepting an identity that others had killed to destroy. "Are you telling me I should walk away? Go back to being Sarah Chen and pretend this conversation never happened?" He studied my face with the intensity of a man trying to memorize every detail. "I'm telling you that whatever you choose, I'll understand. You've already given me more than I deserved just by coming here tonight." The sun was fully up now, painting the room in soft golden light that made everything feel less desperate, more possible. I looked at this dying man who had shaped my life from the shadows, who had sacrificed his own happiness to protect mine, who was offering me a choice between safety and truth. "I want to know everything," I said finally. "I want to know who I really am, where I come from, what happened to our family. I want to understand the life I never got to live." Relief flooded his features like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Then we have work to do," he whispered, "and not much time to do it." The next 3 days blurred together like scenes from someone else's life. Attorney Mitchell had arranged for a medical team to keep General Hayes comfortable while we worked through decades of hidden history. The dining room table disappeared beneath stacks of documents, photographs, and files that painted a picture of a family I'd never known existed. My hands trembled as I opened the first photo album. The cover was embossed with golden letters, "Sarah's First Years." Inside, a baby with dark eyes stared back at me from dozens of carefully arranged pictures. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations to places I couldn't remember, but somehow felt familiar. "Your mother documented everything," the general explained from his wheelchair. The nurse had insisted he conserve his strength, but he refused to miss a moment of this reunion. "She said someday you'd want to know about the life you lived before you could remember living it." There I was at 2 years old, saluting a flag with chubby fingers. At 3, wearing a miniature military uniform while sitting on his lap in what looked like an official portrait. At 4, helping my mother plant flowers in a garden that had probably burned to ash decades ago. "Tell me about her," I said, pointing to a picture of a woman with auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. "Tell me about my mother." His voice grew soft, distant. Colonel Margaret Hayes was the finest officer I ever served with. Brilliant strategist, fearless leader, devoted mother. She could command a room full of generals, then come home and spend hours reading you bedtime stories in different character voices. I traced my finger along her face in the photograph. She looked young, maybe 30, wearing dress blues with ribbons that spoke of distinguished service. What was her specialty? Military intelligence. She spoke 4 languages fluently, could crack codes that stumped entire departments. But her greatest talent was reading people, understanding what motivated them, what made them tick. A chill ran down my spine as I realized where my own analytical abilities might have originated. Throughout my career, commanders had praised my talent for understanding enemy psychology, for anticipating their moves before they made them. I'd always assumed it was intuition developed through experience. Did I inherit that from her? Among other things. Your stubbornness came from me, but your strategic mind, your ability to see 3 moves ahead, that was all Margaret. We worked through the album systematically. Each page revealed another piece of a childhood stolen by circumstances beyond my control. Birthday parties with friends whose names I'd forgotten, family trips to military bases around the world, quiet moments captured between a father, mother, and daughter who clearly adored each other. Here, he said, pointing to a picture that made my breath catch. This was taken the day before the fire. The photograph showed all 3 of us at some kind of military ceremony. I was wearing a small blue dress with white trim, standing between my parents while they received what looked like a joint commendation. My father's hand rested on my shoulder protectively. My mother was smiling down at me with obvious pride. But it was my own expression that stopped me cold. The little girl in that picture looked confident, secure, loved. She had no idea that within 24 hours, her entire world would disappear in flames and lies designed to keep her alive. "I look happy," I whispered. "You were. We all were. It was the last normal day our family ever had." Attorney Mitchell appeared in the doorway with a fresh stack of documents. "General, the financial papers are ready for review, and we've received word from the State Department about the security briefing." "Security briefing?" I looked up from the photo albums. "There are protocols for situations like this," Mitchell explained. "When someone with a classified background comes back from the dead, so to speak, certain agencies need to be notified." The general's expression hardened. "What did they say?" "The original threat assessment is still classified, but they're willing to provide an updated security evaluation. They want to meet with Major Hayes tomorrow to discuss potential risks." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach, the same tension that preceded dangerous missions. "What kind of risks are we talking about?" "The people who targeted our family weren't common criminals," the general said. "They were part of an international network that specialized in eliminating military personnel who possessed sensitive information. Your mother and I both worked on projects that certain foreign governments wanted buried along with us." "Projects like what?" He exchanged a look with Mitchell, some silent communication passing between them. "Counterintelligence operations. Deep cover missions. The kind of work that makes you enemies who hold grudges for decades." I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. My entire military career had been built on the assumption that I was starting from zero, that I had no family connections or inherited obligations. Now I was discovering that I'd been born into a world of secrets and shadows that could still reach out to destroy me. "Sir, with respect, I need you to be more specific. If I'm walking back into a life that someone tried to end with fire and bullets, I need to know exactly what I'm facing." The general's eyes sharpened, focusing on me with the intensity of a commanding officer addressing a subordinate about to enter hostile territory. "Your mother discovered evidence of a mole within NATO intelligence. Someone was selling classified information to foreign powers, information that was getting American soldiers killed in the field. She was getting close to identifying the source. She'd narrowed it down to 3 suspects, all high-ranking officials with access to the most sensitive operational data. The day before the fire, she told me she'd figured out which one it was." "Did she tell you the name?" "No, she said it was too dangerous to discuss until she had absolute proof. She was planning to present her evidence to the Joint Chiefs the following week." I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture that was both clearer and more terrifying than I'd imagined. So they tried to kill our entire family to prevent her from exposing the mole. That's what we believed at the time. But here's what worries me now, 24 years later, that information is still classified. Those same officials, or their protégés, are still in positions of power. If word gets out that William Hayes's daughter is alive and asking questions, He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications perfectly. My resurrection wouldn't just be a family reunion. It would be a threat to people who had spent decades believing their secrets were buried with my parents. Mitchell cleared his throat diplomatically, which is why the State Department wants to brief you on current security protocols. They need to assess whether resuming your true identity poses any ongoing risks. To me or to them? Both. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. I could walk away right now, return to my life as Sarah Chen, continue serving with distinction while keeping this explosive family history buried. It would be safer, simpler, cleaner. But as I looked at the photographs scattered across the table, at the evidence of a childhood filled with love and purpose, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. This man dying in front of me was my father. The woman in these pictures was my mother. The little girl wearing miniature military uniforms was me, and she deserved to be remembered. "When's the briefing?" I asked. Mitchell checked his phone. "Tomorrow at 1400 hours, secure facility in Langley. I'll be there." The general reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was paper thin, marked with age spots and the aftermath of countless IV insertions, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "Sarah, you need to understand something. Once you walk into that briefing, once you officially reclaim the Hayes name, there's no going back. You'll be stepping into a life that powerful people tried very hard to erase." I understand the risks. Do you? Because I've spent 24 years living with the consequences of the choices your mother and I made. I've watched you build an extraordinary life from nothing, become the kind of officer who makes a difference in the world. I won't forgive myself if pursuing this truth destroys everything you've worked for. I studied his face, seeing my own stubborn determination reflected in his features. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't get to make that choice for me anymore. You already made the hard decisions when I was too young to have a voice. Now it's my turn." A slow smile spread across his weathered features. "There's that Hayes backbone. Your mother would be proud. Tell me more about her work. I want to understand what she died protecting." He leaned back in his wheelchair, eyes growing distant as he accessed memories that had probably haunted him for decades. Operation Silent Shield. It was a joint NATO initiative designed to identify and eliminate security breaches within Allied intelligence networks. Margaret was the lead investigator? One of three. The operation was compartmentalized for security reasons. Each investigator only knew part of the overall picture, but Margaret had a talent for seeing patterns that others missed. What kind of patterns? Operational failures that seemed random but weren't. Intelligence leaks that appeared accidental but followed specific timelines. Soldiers dying in ambushes that shouldn't have been possible unless someone had provided enemy forces with detailed information about patrol routes and timing. I felt a chill of recognition. During my own deployments, I'd seen similar patterns, unexplained intelligence failures that had cost good soldiers their lives. I'd always assumed it was the fog of war, the inherent chaos of combat operations. How many people died because of the mole? Directly? At least 47 American service members over a 3-year period. Indirectly? Hundreds more when you factor in compromised operations and blown cover identities. The numbers hit me like physical blows. 47 families destroyed because someone had sold out their loved ones for money or ideology. Hundreds more lives disrupted, careers ended, missions failed. Did they ever catch him? The general's expression darkened. The investigation died with your mother. After the fire, Operation Silent Shield was officially terminated. The surviving investigators were reassigned to different projects. The case was quietly buried. Which means he's still out there. If he's still alive, yes. And if he's still alive, he probably has protégés, people who learned from his methods, who might be carrying on his work. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the sprawling grounds of the estate. The Virginia countryside stretched out in rolling hills covered with autumn foliage. It looked peaceful, pastoral, completely at odds with the deadly secrets we were discussing. What was the evidence she'd found? The proof she was planning to present to the Joint Chiefs? I don't know. She kept that part of the investigation compartmentalized, even from me. But she'd been working late every night for weeks, cross-referencing operational data with personnel files. She said she'd found a pattern that pointed to one specific individual, and that evidence died with her in the fire. We assumed so, but... He hesitated, glancing at Mitchell with an expression I couldn't read. But what? 3 days before she died, Margaret mentioned something about insurance. She said she'd put certain documents in a safe place, somewhere they'd be protected even if something happened to her. My heart rate spiked. You think she hid copies of her evidence? I think your mother was too good an intelligence officer to put all her eggs in one basket. If she'd really identified the mole, she would have protected that information. Where? Where would she hide something that important? The General looked at me with an expression that was part hope, part fear. I've been wondering about that for 24 years. But I think I might finally know the answer. He wheeled his chair over to an antique desk in the corner of the room, pulling out a key that he'd worn on a chain around his neck. Inside the desk's locked drawer was a small wooden box that looked handmade, carved with intricate military insignia. Your mother gave this to me the night before she died. Said it was for Sarah when she was old enough to understand what it meant. With trembling hands, he opened the box. Inside was another locket, identical to the one I wore except for the inscription. This one read, "For my brave girl, the truth will set you free. Love, Mom." But beneath the locket was something else. A small brass key, old-fashioned and heavy, with numbers etched into its surface. "A safe deposit box key," I breathed. "Bank of Virginia, downtown Richmond branch. Box number 847. It's been sitting there for 24 years, waiting for someone with the Hayes family name to claim it." I took the key from his hands, feeling its weight like a physical manifestation of destiny. Whatever my mother had discovered, whatever evidence had made her worth killing, it was waiting for me in a vault less than an hour's drive away. "Tomorrow, after the security briefing," I said, "we're going to find out what secret was worth destroying our family to protect." The General nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Sarah, once we open that box, there's no telling what forces we might set in motion. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at the photographs scattered across the table, at the evidence of a family torn apart by other people's greed and treachery. Then I looked at my dying father, a man who had sacrificed everything to keep me alive, but had never been able to truly live himself. I'm prepared to finish what she started. The morning of the security briefing arrived with the kind of gray sky that makes everything feel muted, uncertain. I stood in the bathroom mirror of my hotel room, adjusting my dress uniform for what felt like the 100th time. The ribbons on my chest told the story of Sarah Chen, a decorated officer who had earned every commendation through blood, sweat, and determination. But today, I would walk into a room as Sarah Hayes, carrying secrets that could unravel careers and possibly cost lives. The drive to Langley took exactly 47 minutes. I counted every one of them, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel in nervous rhythm. The facility appeared through the trees like a fortress of glass and concrete, all clean lines and tinted windows that revealed nothing of the secrets housed within. Security was thorough but expected. Multiple checkpoints, biometric scanners, escorts who spoke in measured tones, and avoided eye contact. By the time I reached conference room C7, my nerves had settled into the familiar calm that preceded dangerous operations. This was just another briefing, another mission, another day in the life of a soldier. Except it wasn't. 3 people waited for me around a polished table that reflected the overhead lights like a dark mirror. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. A younger man who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster, all pressed uniform and military bearing. And an older gentleman in civilian clothes whose presence somehow commanded the room despite his quiet demeanor. "Major Hayes," the woman said, standing to shake my hand. I'm Director Sarah Morrison, State Department Intelligence. This is Colonel James Wright from Pentagon Special Operations and Dr. Richard Lansing from the National Security Archive. I took my seat, noting how they'd arranged themselves to study me from multiple angles. Standard interrogation positioning, though they'd probably call it a security consultation. Before we begin, Director Morrison continued, I need to verify your identity through means beyond standard documentation. She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed a little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting in what looked like a military office. The child was wearing a miniature dress uniform and saluting with serious concentration while an older man in general's stars looked on with obvious pride. Do you recognize this photograph? I stared at the image, feeling something stir in the deepest corners of my memory. Not visual recognition, but emotional resonance. The feeling of being small and safe and important all at once. I think it's me, I said quietly. With my father. It was taken in General Hayes's Pentagon office, 18 months before the fire. You'd insisted on visiting him at work, said you wanted to see where important military decisions were made. Dr. Lansing leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. What else do you remember about that period? Any details, no matter how small? Fragments, the smell of leather and coffee, feeling proud of something, though I can't remember what. A woman with auburn hair who used to sing while she worked. The three officials exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Major Hayes, Colonel Wright said, we need to discuss the circumstances that led to your family's disappearance, specifically Operation Silent Shield and your mother's investigation. My spine straightened automatically. How much do you know about that? More than you might expect, Operation Silent Shield wasn't completely buried after your mother's death. Certain elements of the investigation continued under different classifications, different oversight. Director Morrison opened a thick folder, revealing pages of documents marked with various levels of security clearance. What we're about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. Your decision to reclaim your identity has triggered a review of information that's been sealed for over 2 decades. What kind of information? Evidence that your mother's investigation was more successful than anyone realized at the time. Evidence that suggests the mole she was tracking wasn't just stealing intelligence, but actively directing enemy operations against American forces. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. You're saying the person she identified was responsible for the deaths of American soldiers? We're saying the person she identified was responsible for a systematic campaign of sabotage that cost hundreds of lives over a 5-year period. The fire that destroyed your family wasn't just about silencing an investigation. It was about protecting someone who had committed treason on a massive scale. Dr. Lansing pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table face down. Before you look at this, Major Hayes, I want you to understand that what you're about to see will change everything. The name your mother uncovered, the evidence she died protecting, it's all here. My hand hovered over the photograph like it was a live grenade. Once I turned it over, there would be no going back to the simple life of Major Sarah Chen, orphan soldier making her own way in the world. Who is it? Turn it over and see for yourself. I flipped the photograph with hands that barely trembled. The image showed a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing the uniform of a high-ranking NATO official. His face was familiar in the way that important people's faces become familiar through news reports and official ceremonies. But what made my blood run cold wasn't recognition. It was the handwritten note paperclipped to the photo. In my mother's precise handwriting, General Marcus Thornton, mole confirmed, evidence secured, will present findings Monday. The photograph slipped from my fingers, floating to the table like a falling leaf. General Marcus Thornton. I knew that name, had seen it in military publications and historical documents. He'd been one of the most respected officers of his generation, a hero of multiple conflicts, a man whose word carried weight in the highest levels of government. "This is impossible," I breathed. "General Thornton is a legend. His service record is spotless." "His public service record is spotless," Colonel Wright corrected. "His private activities tell a different story." Director Morrison leaned forward, her expression grave. "Major Hayes, what we're about to tell you has never been officially acknowledged. General Thornton didn't die in that helicopter crash in 1998 like the official report stated. He survived, went underground, and has been operating through intermediaries and proxies for the past 25 years. The room spun slightly around me. "You're saying he's still alive?" "We're saying he's still active, still dangerous, and still very interested in making sure that certain secrets remain buried." Dr. Lansing pulled out another document, this one bearing multiple official seals and signatures. "Your mother's evidence wasn't destroyed in the fire. She'd hidden copies in multiple locations, including that safe deposit box your father told you about. But what she didn't know was that Thornton had people watching her, tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike." "Then why didn't they just steal the evidence? Why burn down our house and fake our deaths?" "Because your mother was too smart to keep all her evidence in one place. Thornton knew that eliminating the investigator would be easier than finding every hidden cache of documents." He was probably right. As I sat in that sterile conference room, staring at evidence that my mother had died protecting, I understood something profound about the nature of truth. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding someone close. Sometimes it's letting them go completely, trusting that the values you've instilled will guide them when you can no longer be there to protect them. My father had spent 24 years believing he'd failed us both, but he'd actually given me the greatest gift possible, a chance to become the person I was meant to be, free from the weight of his secrets and the shadow of his enemies. The little girl in those photographs had grown up to be exactly who she needed to be. And now, finally, Sarah Hayes was ready to finish what her mother had started.